Steve Lukather. You may not know the name off the top of your head, but you've definitely heard his work, probably hundreds of times. He's one of the most recorded guitarists in history, and his fingerprints are all over the sound of modern pop, rock, and even Randy B. From his years in Toto to legendary session work on albums by Michael Jackson, Boz Scaggs, Lionel Richie, and literally hundreds more, Lukather has quietly shaped the sound of generations. But beyond the studio credits and number one hits, Lukather is a musician's musician, a tone wizard, a versatile writer, and a shredder who never lets his technique overpower his feel. In this deep dive, we'll explore Steve Lukather's early life, his path into music, his jaw-dropping session career, his songwriting legacy, and the deep and lasting influence he's had on both guitarists and the broader musical landscape. And we'll also talk about one of his closest friendships with none other than Eddie Van Halen. Steve Lukather was born in 1957 in San Fernando Valley, California. Like many kids growing up in the 60s, his world changed when he first saw the Beatles perform on The Ed Sullivan Show. It wasn't just the music, it was the electricity, the vibe, the fact that four guys with guitars could command the world attention. That was it. Steve wanted to play guitar. At age 7, he received his first acoustic guitar. But his real awakening came when his father brought home 2 albums, Meet the Beatles and the Beatles' second album. That was all it took. He began teaching himself by ear, playing along to records obsessively. By high school, he had moved on to electric guitar and was diving into jazz, fusion, and the technical mastery of players like Larry Carlton, Jeff Beck, and George Benson. He also devoured the sounds of Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton, and Jimmy Page. Steve attended Grant High School in Van Nuys, where he met the Porcaro brothers, Jeff, Mike, and Steve, and David Paich. These connections would form the heart of Toto years later. But even before Toto, Lukather was already building a reputation as a prodigy. Jeff Porcaro, a respected drummer even as a teen, introduced Lukather to his father, Joe Porcaro, a legendary session percussionist. Joe recognized the talent and helped usher Lukather into the L.A. studio scene. By the late 70s, Steve was everywhere. His first major break came with Boz Scaggs on the album Down 2, then left in 1977, and then the follow-up Middleman in 1980. But it was what happened in between that cemented his reputation, the formation of Toto. Toto was born out of the idea that studio musicians could make a band their own. Jeff and Steve Porcaro, David Paich, Bobby Kimball, David Hungate, and Steve Lukather pooled their powers and released their debut album Toto in 1978. The musicianship was off the charts, blending rock, pop, soul, and fusion into a slick and powerful sound. Lukather's guitar tone was fat, warm, and clean when it needed to be, but he could melt your face when the solo hit. By Toto 4 in 1982, the band was on top of the world. Rosanna, Africa, I Won't Hold You Back, massive hits, and Lukather's play was at the core of all of them. His solo on Rosanna alone is considered one of the finest in pop history. Tasteful, melodic, technical, and full of soul. He also co-wrote many of the band's biggest songs, including Hold the Line, I'll Be Over You, and later, How Does It Feel? But while Toto was climbing the charts, Lukather's phone never stopped ringing. He was the guy you called if you needed precision, feel, and creativity in the same take. And nowhere was that more obvious than on Michael Jackson's Thriller, the biggest selling album of all time. Lukather played guitar on multiple Thriller tracks, including Beat It, where he laid down the rhythm parts. Yes, the iconic chunky riff under Eddie Van Halen solo. That's Lukather. He also handled the bass guitar on that track and did much of the synth and guitar arranging on Human Nature. The Thriller sessions were a perfect example of Lukather's chameleon-like skill. He could be funky, heavy, or silky smooth, depending on what the song needed. In fact, over his career, Steve Lukather has played on over 1,500 albums. That includes artists like Lionel Richie, Paul McCartney, Elton John, Don Henley, Chicago, and Aretha Franklin. He also played on nearly every hit coming out of the West Coast pop and AOR scenes in the 80s and early 90s. But while his session resume is staggering, what makes Lukather special isn't just how often he's played, it's how he plays. He has an uncanny sense of melody. His solos often sing like vocal lines, and his rhythm playing, criminally underrated. Clean when it needs to be, fat and funky in the pocket, or razor-sharp with a hint of distortion. He's a master of restraint and release. Now, let's talk about Eddie Van Halen. Steve and Eddie weren't just friends. They were best friends. The two bonded over their love of gear, tone, and musical innovation. They would spend hours together jamming, experimenting with pedals, amps, and technique. Lukather has said that Eddie was like a brother to him, and the two would often share uncredited collaborations. Lukather even played rhythm guitar parts for Van Halen when Eddie was focused on solos in studio. One little known fact, Lukather co-wrote and played guitar on the song Twist a Knife, which later became a solo Sammy Hagar track, but was originally a Van Halen demo. And it was Lukather who helped Van Halen transition from analog to digital studio workflows, something Eddie credited him for in later interviews. Eddie, for his part, deeply admired Lukather's versatility and melodic touch. In interviews, Eddie often praised Lukather as one of the greatest guitar players alive and someone who gets no credit for how brilliant he is. Coming from Eddie Van Halen, that's a serious endorsement. The two were so close that Lukather was one of the few people allowed into Eddie's inner circle even during Guitarist's most reclusive years. And when Eddie passed away in 2020, Lukather gave one of the most heartfelt tributes, calling him the Mozart guitar and saying the world had lost a once-in-a-generation soul. As a solo artist, Lukather has released multiple albums showcasing his love of fusion, blues, jazz, and even progressive rock. Albums like Luke, Ever-Changing Times, and Transition are filled with personal stories, jaw-dropping musicianship, and a surprising amount of emotional depth. He's also one half of Ringo Starr's all-star band. Yes, the Ringo Starr, and has been touring with them for years. So why isn't Steve Lukather a household name like Eric Clapton or Jimmy Page? Maybe it's because he never courted the spotlight. Maybe it's because he spent so much of his career behind the scenes, doing the work instead of seeking the glory. But ask any serious guitarist, and they'll tell you, Steve Lukather is the guy, the one who never misses, the one whose tone you chase, the one who somehow made pop radio more musical. Today, his legacy continues. New generations of guitarists are discovering his work through YouTube, through interviews, and through his masterclasses and clinics. His tone and touch live on in every player who chooses melody over mindless speed, in every artist who believes in serving the song. Steve Lukather isn't just a guitarist. He's a genre-defining, behind-the-scenes architect of the music that shaped our lives. And now, finally, he's getting the credit he always deserved. You may not have known his name before, but now you do, and you'll never hear pop, rock, or fusion quite the same way again. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and subscribe to the Echo Lab for more deep dives into the hidden stories behind music. Your support helps this channel grow and keeps the echoes going. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.